Just days before Christmas, she would vanish from her home and would not be found for 3 decades. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jonelle Matthews. Viewer discretion is advised. Jonelle Matthews was born in Santa Barbara, California in 1972. Her biological mother was actually, I think, 13 years old, and so ultimately she would end up giving Jonelle up for adoption. Jonelle was then quickly adopted by James and Gloria Matthews, who already had a daughter, a biological daughter, and their daughter's name was Jennifer. Growing up, Jonelle was a really sweet kid. She got along with her sister really well. They were like the closest, bestest of friends. And as Jonelle got older, when she was, 10, 11 years old, she knew she was adopted, and she had these ideas of wanting to maybe one day find her biological mom, but unfortunately, that never got to happen. Jonelle had a really bright future ahead of her. She was incredibly intelligent. She loved to sing. She was a part of the school choir. So eventually, her family would relocate to Greeley, Colorado, which is where this case actually took place. And she was attending Franklin Middle School when this case occurred. But yeah, she sang as a part of the choir there, and she loved to do that. She loved singing. She also loved her faith. Her family would attend the Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. But all the hopes and aspirations, all of the dreams, the concept of finding her biological mother, whatever future she may have had, would never get to happen. Because just days before Christmas in 1984, somebody, a monster, took her from the world. It was December 20th, 1984. Jonelle's mother was actually out of state. She was taking care of her sick mom, and so she was not there. That same night, Jonelle had a concert to attend, and her sister Jennifer who played basketball for school. She was at playing a basketball game, which is where, and their dad had to basically, because they were on at the exact same time, her dad had to choose which one to go to. And so he ends up going to the basketball game. So the concert ends, and one of Jonelle's friend, Deanna, her and Deanna's dad would drop Jonelle back off at her home. They left her there. They dropped her off at approximately 8:15 p.m. From what it sounds like, they saw her go into the house. The door closed, and that was it. Jonelle would never be seen alive by her friends or family ever again. Less than an hour and a half later, at about 9:30 p.m., Jonelle's father, Jim, returns back to the house with Jennifer. When they get inside, the house is empty. Nobody's there. They thought that was strange, so Jim would contact the people that would have dropped Jonelle off. They told him, we dropped her off, we saw her go inside at this time. And so he calls a couple more people, some people from the neighborhood that Jonelle knew, other friends, acquaintances. None of them had seen Jonelle. And so within like an hour or two, Jim calls 911 to report Jonelle missing. When police arrive, Jim, kind of walks them through the house, and they look in the living room. And according to Jim, the TV was on when he got home. There were items in the living room like Jonelle's shoes and stuff like that. There was a heater that had been turned on next to this chair that Jonelle would typically sit in. So it looked as if Jonelle did get inside, and she turned on the TV and started watching it. And then something happened. Her bedroom was in a normal state. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing was missing from it. Nothing was missing from the house other than Jonelle. There was no sign of forced entry into the house. There was no signs of a struggle. Everything was just up to par. It was all normal. Just, where is Jonelle? But what they did find that was certainly suspicious is because this was obviously during a time when it was snowing, and outside the house they found shoe impressions. Someone had been looking inside a window, perhaps, based on where the foot impressions were. But the weird thing is that most of these shoe impressions and these footprints were raked out by someone. Somebody took a rake and literally scraped over all of the shoe impressions that they could find, which means that those shoe impressions were done by someone who probably did something very bad, because they did not want their shoe impressions to be found in the snow, so they deliberately destroyed them. It didn't look like the person got all of them, though. But would the shoe impressions ultimately help them identify the killer? Not really, but it did indicate, it showed that there was somebody, because they were fresh shoe impressions, that there was somebody outside that house, that the shoe size was definitely not going to be the size of a child. Someone was watching Jonelle. Someone was possibly stalking her. Someone was waiting for the right moment to abduct her. And the disappearance of Jonelle Matthews became instantly like nationwide news. Even the president at the time, Ronald Reagan, spoke on Jonelle's name with regards to her disappearance. Jonelle Matthews also became the first, or one of the very first kids to ever be featured on the milk cartons. She would be called, the milk carton kid. Police were also kind of working on the assumption that maybe Jonelle ran away. She did want to know who her biological mom was. Could that have something to do with why she suddenly disappeared? Did she go out and search for her? Well, her parents, her adopted parents, were always very supportive of Jonelle wanting to know who her mom was. But the problem is with the adoption process, it's usually private and, no one knows each other. But then they thought on the flip side, what if her biological mom found out where she was now and kidnapped her to get her back? Police found her biological mom. Her name was Terry, and they began to kind of, watch her, and they realized pretty quickly that she wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. There was nothing unusual about her behavior. Certainly, they didn't see Jonelle with her. And again, to kind of stress, she would not know where her daughter ended up. That's how the adoption process would work. It was sealed. It was private. So she wouldn't even have known where to find her, unless she had some really good contacts who can get her the information. But then police were tinkering with the idea, well, what about her adopted father, Jim? Maybe he did something to her. Because, it's a lot of times it's the people closest to the victim. Certainly cases where they're adopted children, there could be maybe sexual abuse, anything along those lines. Maybe he did something to her, but now he needed to silence her. But pretty quickly, that was no, that's just not possible. He didn't do it. First of all, he wasn't that type of guy. He was well-respected, well-liked, which I know doesn't really mean anything because a lot of bad people are that way. But, there was nothing unusual about Jim's behavior that stood out to them. He was extremely cooperative with police. He definitely seemed, and so did her adopted mom, they both seemed really, really concerned about where their daughter was. And also, he had an alibi. He had a really clear-cut alibi for the time frame where Jonelle would have vanished. There was just no physical way he had anything to do with that. And so he was ruled out. And her adopted mom was obviously ruled out because she was in a different state. There was something unusual that was on police's radar. And that was one particular man who was trying to consistently insert himself into the investigation. And that was a neighbor of the Matthews. His name was Steve Panky. He, at that time, was really well respected in the community. He was well liked. He was, just a good guy. But he did live in the same area, not too far from where the Matthews home was. And also, he attended briefly the same church that the Matthews family attended, where Jonelle was a part of. And I guess at one point, Steve Panky got excommunicated from this church, and he was not happy about it. It definitely upset him. But he would kind of always try to reach out to police and say, hey, where are you guys with the Jonelle Matthews case? It's just it was unusual. Over the years, he would write letters to the DA asking that, them what's going on with this case. And he would try to explain it many, many years later that he was a big true crime fan. He loved that stuff. And that he was just doing that because, he wanted to help find Jonelle. Still unusual behavior for one person to do. So police kind of brought him in for questioning, just more as a witness type person. And he said he had an alibi that he had gone out of town with his family. Later, his wife at the time, Angela, would tell police that he lied about when they left. He lied to police because they had not left until after Jonelle had disappeared. And this was not a planned trip like he told police it was. It was a very sudden, impromptu Christmas time trip. And according to his, well, now ex-wife, because they're obviously not married anymore, but he would talk to her about the Jonelle Matthews case all the time. He would bring it up. He had like newspaper articles about it. She also tells police that during, I guess, Steve would find out that a pastor at the church that the Matthews attended said something along the lines of, the pastor heard a message from God that Jonelle would be returned home safely and alive. And according to Angela, Steve's ex-wife, he said, or he yelled, "That's a false prophet right there." Many, many years later, around 2008, Steve Panky had a son who died. And I guess at the funeral, Angela said that Steve would kiss the urn where his son's ashes were in and said, quote, "I hope God didn't allow this to happen because of Jonelle Matthews." And a few people heard that. And that was just such a bizarre thing to say. Steve Panky, down the road, would actually end up running for governor of Idaho. He ran as a Republican in 2018, and he only garnered 1.4% of votes, and he was not elected at all. So they kind of questioned Angela again about this trip. Where was this trip? She said, "Oh, he took us to California." And again, it was impromptu, even though Steve said it wasn't. And so he got into an argument, I guess, with a family member in California, and he cut the trip short. And he took his family in the car and began to drive back to Colorado. On the way back to Colorado, Angela turned the radio on, and there was some news clips with regards to this missing girl, Jonelle Matthews. And Steve became really interested in that. He said, "Hey, keep flipping channels to see if anyone else has information on that case." And when they got back to Greeley, Colorado, before they went to their home, he stopped at a couple different locations to buy all the newspapers he could because he wanted to read up on the case. And apparently, he burned his car shortly after arriving back home. That's very odd. They also discovered that Steve Panky said something that he should not have ever known. He had told people that somebody raked out the shoe impressions in the snow outside of Jonelle's home. That information was never made public to literally anybody. The only people who knew that were the police. So if he was saying that to people, which they confirmed he was saying that to people, that would indicate he knew more about the case directly than he was letting on. So they have a lot of circumstantial things on him. His behavior was the main thing. But you can't just arrest someone on behavior. And unfortunately, Jonelle's case goes cold. And then, like I said earlier, Steve Panky runs for governor of Idaho. He fails. He comes back to Colorado. And he's just sort of continually brings up the case from time to time. He says, "I'm a true crime fan. I want to see what's going on." Obviously, he's much, much, much older now, but his behavior is still very suspicious. And then in 2019, a discovery is made. There were some construction workers who were working on a site about 15 miles from where Jonelle Matthews' home was. They were digging into the earth when all of a sudden a human skull pops up. They then dug more and found the full skeletal remains of a small person. And this person, there was torn clothing on this skeleton, which would later be identified as clothing that Jonelle Matthews was last seen wearing. They took the skeletal remains back to the coroner's office, where using dental records and also DNA from the bones, that this was, in fact, the remains of 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews. She had a gunshot wound through her skull. They go back to Steve Panky. They look through their thousands and thousands of documents they have on this case. They read all the things that Steve Panky had said. And there were just so many instances where he incriminated himself during the course of this 30-plus year investigation. He kept trying to inject himself. He wrote letters to the DA. He kept reaching out to the police. He said things to his now ex-wife. He said things to friends. He said things to multiple people, which all implicated he knew more about this case than anyone else. The biggest thing was the raking of the shoes, the shoe impressions. Nobody should have known that. They deliberately kept that information out from the public because that was a very unique thing. That's not something you see often at all. And he knew it. He knew that happened. And he was saying that way early on in the investigation, not 30 years down the road, but really early on, before the internet existed. So they bring him back in for questioning, and he denies having anything to do with her death. They don't have DNA with her remains. They don't have any physical evidence that actually connects him to this case. They don't have the murder weapon because that would have been long gone at this point, but they do know that he owned a handgun at the time of Jonelle's murder. He tries to blame the person who dropped Jonelle off at home. Did you look into him? They did, and they ruled him out. They ruled out her adopted father. They ruled out the biological mom. The only suspect they had was Steve Panky. They had the fact that he took a very impromptu trip out of town directly after Jonelle was murdered. They found out he lied that because he told them that he had been planning that trip for months. But as a matter of fact, according to his ex-wife and his family in California, he had initially declined to go out there for Christmas. And he was not planning it. And that according to his ex-wife and his family in California, they just suddenly got up and went there. But then it's just so many statements, so many things he said that was just so suspicious. And while they didn't charge him back then because they didn't feel like they had enough, now that they have Jonelle's body and they know that she is in fact deceased, they know that Steve Panky lived in that same area, pretty much the same neighborhood almost. He had been mad about being kicked out of the same church that the Matthews family attended. There was, because people asked, like, what was his motive? Why Jonelle? And they don't have the motive. That's the biggest thing, is they don't have one. They don't know if she was sexually assaulted or not. They have no way of knowing that. They don't have the murder weapon. But why? Why Jonelle? Some think it's because he was so mad at the church that he just wanted to target someone, anyone. And he knew the Matthews family kind of a little bit. But did he know their movements that night? Did he know that, the mom would be out of town, the dad would be at a basketball game, that Jonelle would end up being dropped off at the home alone? Did he know that? They don't know. But he is still indicted by a grand jury for the kidnapping and murder of Jonelle Matthews, as well as charged with falsifying statements. He goes on trial, I think in 2021. He pleads not guilty. He swears up and down he had nothing to do with it. His defense attorney's like, listen, the guy's really into true crime. He always has been. He was just fascinated by this case. And what else could he really say? In November of 2021, the judge declares a mistrial because the jury comes back completely divided. They're undecided. It's a hung jury. The prosecution said, we're doing this again because they really felt that he was their guy. So in October of 2022, he goes on trial for the second time. It does sound like he himself testified at this trial. And, they asked him questions about, why were you always talking about this one case specifically? He basically just says, listen, I knew the family and I'm a big true crime person. I didn't do this. This time, the jury agrees with the prosecution. They find him guilty of second-degree kidnapping, and that was with the use of a deadly weapon. They found him guilty of felony murder. They found him guilty of reporting false information to the police. Guilty on all charges. And Stephen Panky was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Meaning it'll be like in the 2040s when he can ask for parole. And basically he says, quote, I am a Christian, I will be in heaven, I am innocent, and this is not justice for Jonelle, end quote. Did he do it? I don't know. I want to feel like they got the right guy, but at the same time, the fact that there is not a single shred of physical evidence, like no DNA, no fingernail scrapings could be done because she was, skeletal remains when they found her. They couldn't find any physical evidence connecting him directly to her kidnapping murder. There were no witnesses. Nobody saw it happen. Nobody overheard anything. It just happened. And I've always been a big, reasonable doubt person. I would rather have guilty people on the streets than have an innocent person in prison. My gut tells me, based on everything, if I was on this jury, right? My gut tells me that everything he said and did was extremely suspicious. The raking of the shoe impressions when he should not have known that right there is kind of like the biggest red flag for me. And that would, for me on a jury, I would be like, God, that really sounds like he did it. But would that be enough to say he definitely did it? I don't know. I don't know. They don't have an actual true motive. They don't know exactly what happened that night. All they really know for sure, for absolute certainty, is that she was dropped off at that house. And this is confirmed by the person who dropped her off and Jonelle's friend. She went into the house alone. Nobody was in it. And then suddenly she's gone. That's it. That's all we know. And then 30 some odd years later, she's found buried under a construction site. Where along that path is Steve Panky for sure guilty? I don't know. I definitely think he did it. I do, just based on the information. I think he is guilty. But could I come to that conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt if I was a jury member? I don't know if I could. I would have wanted to say guilty, but that's not how it works. It works as you have to be able to prove his guilt. And I don't know. I'm not sure. But my gut, my heart tells me they got the right guy. And so, in the end, Jonelle Matthews, hopefully, got the justice that she very rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case, True Crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. What do you guys think? Do you feel like he is definitely guilty? Did they have enough to show he was guilty? Do you believe him when he says he's innocent? Let me know. But at any rate, if you are new here, hello, my name is Mike. I tell true crime stories here on YouTube, obviously. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok, probably for the next month or so. I'm filming this on December 19th. And on January 19th, TikTok is supposed to be banned from the United States, but that could change. As of, that's the news as of right now of me filming this video. So if you want to follow my TikTok, it's linked below in the link tree in the description of this video below. I have 2 TikTok pages you can follow if you like, and then obviously subscribe here because this is where I'm going to be 100% pretty much from now on if TikTok definitely goes away. I'll be posting long form and short form true crime videos and like occasionally like, random like entertainment videos because that's what I'm doing on my other page on TikTok is doing like movie and TV show reviews and stuff. So I'll probably inject that into this page consistently if TikTok goes away. But anyway, if there's a case you want me to cover, just send me a quick email. My email is listed below. Just send me the name of the individual, where it happened, and when it happened. I'll add it to the list. The list is 6,700 names long now. I pick my cases at random. You can see the list, by the way. It's also in my link tree. You can scroll through it. It's alphabetical. So if you don't see a name on there you want me to cover, then send me the email. If you see the name on there, you don't have to send me anything because I already have it on there. And I'll get to that case eventually. I just can't promise you when. But that is it for this video. So until the next case, ta-ta for now, True Crime Arunish.